Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. The McDowell Sonoran Conservancy is proud to present this lecture. We're going to be talking about some desert hacks and facts. I'd like to introduce our speaker today, is Chris Crone. He's a master steward with the McDowell Sonoran Conservancy. He's been very active in a group within the Conservancy that we call the Pathfinders, which loves to do human history and do research and presentations about that. So we're going to touch on some of that today. Chris's love of history, particularly that of Arizona and the Southwest, has made his involvement in the Pathfinders especially rewarding. And I think Chris is going to share a little bit more about that as part of the introduction.
Yes, certainly will. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome all. Thanks for the nice introduction, Brian. Just quickly, I know many of you saw or were expecting Len Marcis as the speaker, who's a fantastic gentleman and always gives a great presentation. He sends his regrets. He had to attend to a family issue, a family health issue that was actually out of state, and it was the right place for him to be. So I'm here. I'm happy to be here, and more than looking forward to sharing with you what we have today. I'm going to start off with, as Brian indicated, a little bit of introduction. How many know about the Conservancy? Almost everybody knows about it. How many of you are stewards here today? Okay, we got a handful of stewards, so welcome those of you that are not. So I'm going to tell you a bit about that and the preserve very quickly, just so you understand the background and where we are coming from. So the McDowell Sonoran Preserve is a place. It's owned and operated primarily by the city of Scottsdale. The McDowell Sonoran Conservancy are the people that make it our goal, our vision, our objective to care for it, maintain it, protect it. And so that's the distinction between the two. I'm going to give you just a little more detail on that. If you don't know some of this already, I think it's worth knowing. It is about a third of the size of the city, over 30,000 acres. I'll show you a representation of that in just a minute. We have 8 trailheads now throughout the different points of the preserve, and over 200 miles of trails. I think it's 215 or 225. Anyway, it keeps growing, and so there's plenty of space and plenty of discovery to do out there. We, as the Conservancy, were founded in 1991. We were originally called the McDowell Sonoran Land Trust, and we evolved into the Conservancy that we have today. And the Conservancy is manned by upward of 700 stewards, active stewards, and we assist. We're all volunteers, although we do have a good small staff. And then we also have the city of Scottsdale, who has an equally small staff. So together, we all coordinate and work to keep this preserve the way it should be as a preserve, and try to keep the cost down as well. That's the benefit, I guess, of having us volunteers. Our mission is to preserve and advance open space. And we do it with 3 pillars. I'll tell you about those in a minute. Our vision is a culture that ensures the preserve and values the natural open space. And so that goes beyond the preserve. That's kind of our backyard, but we're interested in open space in general. So that's very important. And that culture, our vision isn't to have a culture among ourselves. We think we have that. The vision is to have a culture in the community that values open space and that particularly knows about and enjoys the preserve. So I mentioned the 3 pillars: science, education, and stewardship. I won't go into great detail, but we do some cool stuff on the science side. We study invasive non-native species and how to control them. The preserve is our lab, so to speak, and that's good stuff that can be translated to other parts of the country and the world. So there's good value in that, and that's just one of the many activities that we do. Education, this is part of the education standpoint where we like to share, starting with younger people. We're very involved with the school system now and the STEAM program. STEAM is STEM with an A in it, which stands for the arts. And so we're trying to combine the cultural part of it along with the scientific part of it, and work with the kids so that they grow up having an appreciation of nature and of open space itself. And then finally, last but not least, stewardship, kind of, I've already mentioned, self-explanatory. We're the ones who try to implement and keep things running smoothly out there. We have 9 different programs. Happy to tell you about those. We're not going to go into detail today, though. This slide simply gives you a sense of the partners, the folks that we work with. And I think you will recognize most, if not all of them up there. We work with some very, very dynamic and important organizations that help us get our job done. And we like to think we do the same for them. So the Pathfinders were mentioned. That's the group that I'm kind of representing today as part of the Conservancy. We're the folks that are very interested in our cultural resources, human history, archaeology, things like that. So we again focused on education. We do that this way. We do that through publications, articles, and other vehicles to get the information across. We also have an important activity that we've started fairly recently, and that is that we've got stewards that are part of the Arizona Site Steward Program. Arizona Site Steward Program is statewide, as the name implies, and that group takes care of the cultural resources, archaeological sites, and the nature activities of that nature, and make sure that they are protected, preserved, and periodically visited, so that we can ensure that there's no degradation or any problem with it. So we're proud now that we have, what is it, 8 or 10 of our stewards are in that program, and that'll be a growing program. And so we're doing something for the wider community as well. And then finally, research. We do research on the historical side. I don't know if any of you have heard of the Stoneman Road. That's fodder for another whole presentation we'd be happy to do for you sometime. But the Stoneman Road was a route between our Fort McDowell and Fort Whipple, and it goes right through the preserve. So we actually went out and traced it and walked it, discovered where it went within the preserve, and did some really new research as to what that was, and then filled it in with the history and the value of that road. So anyway, that's it. That's for the Pathfinders. So that's the Conservancy. We're going to jump into our subject. If you would like to know more, just remember our website, mcdowellsonoran.org, or tackle the blue shirts that are here, and we'd be happy to tell you more about it. Always happy to have your participation. Okay, so we're here today for something called Desert Hacks and Facts. Now, what in the world is that? Well, it's been a long, hot summer, and we're right now on the verge of going into our prime season, where the weather gets cooler and everybody's energized. So before we do that, we thought we'd do something kind of like an overview, maybe even a little bit on the fun side, as opposed to, we typically, if you come see one of our presentations, it'll be kind of a deep dive on a person or an event or an activity that occurred, and we'll get into that. In this case, we're going to hit a lot of different things, and so we have called it, I think, pretty honestly, a potpourri of pointless but interesting and mostly useful information. So that's what you're going to get. Don't look for a common thread, except that it happened in the Southwest, and it's going to be probably a plant, animal, or person. That's as much of a connection as I can guarantee. So we're going to jump around, but again, the idea is to try to enjoy that. So, the real value could be that you're able to impress your family and friends. When you hear this stuff, you can repeat that and say, oh, by the way, that's what that is, and here's what it does, and anyway. So that's probably the best value, because that and $5 will get you a cup of coffee at Starbucks. So, okay, so here we go. Desert Hacks and Facts. Mentioned the wonder of the neighborhood. First, we want you to be safe out there. So I said I wanted it to be a little bit light and fast moving. I'm going to start with a rather serious subject, okay? And it's important because it's very real. It's a problem. And we want to make sure that if you're out enjoying the preserve, that you come back safely. And so that subject is that of heat and the dangers of heat. So we start out with this is actually from the newspaper. And again, it's a tough subject, but it illustrates the point very well. So I don't know if you can read it. I didn't want to read the whole thing to you, but let me give you the salient points is that the lady involved was 57 years old, and that's relevant for a reason that we'll emphasize here in a minute. She was out hiking with her husband, she and her husband, and they separated. Don't know the reason for that, but they decided to go different places and they were going to meet. There was only one phone. So he ended up with the phone. She didn't. He gets there to the quote meeting point and she's not there. So clearly very concerned, calls the police department. They come out with the fire department, search and rescue, and try to find her. She was not at the meeting spot. So they continued the search. I think it was about 6 hours. And they did find her, but unfortunately she did not survive. So that's very sad. But the benefit of that is that we can learn some things. So there are some takeaways from this. Where's my slide here? Here we go. First of all, her age, as I'll point out in a minute. Those of us that might be a shade or more over 55 are more susceptible for a variety of reasons. But it really seems to target the older generation. If you're a moving target, that's a problem. If you get lost, if you have a problem, the important thing is to stay in a place, hopefully a known place, and hopefully one that somebody else knows you'll be there. And that's what happened. This person was moving and they, unable to find her quickly enough, certainly, to do anything. And there was no communication. I mentioned the phone call, or the telephone, cell phone. And since they didn't have ability to talk to each other and the rescue people couldn't talk to them, that was the problem. And then finally, poor judgment. We live in a state that has typically, unsurprisingly, very high temperatures. And we have heat alerts. There was actually a heat alert in place, excessive heat warning in place at the time they went hiking. And when did they leave? They left at 12:30 in the afternoon. And from the beginning, you noticed it happened just about this time of year. Now today, it's a little cloudy and not so miserable out there from a heat standpoint, but in general, we know that this is a very warm time of year. So that combination of things, and let me kind of summarize it here, has killed 197 people. That was in 2019, the last year we had the statistics, and 83% came in those 3 critical months. And as I've already mentioned, it seems to target, or the most susceptible people are those of us who are over 55. So what else can we learn? What's helpful here? Heat exhaustion. I don't know if you're familiar with these terms, but heat exhaustion is like the first level of distress. And what does heat exhaustion look like? I mean, we're all going to get warm, we're all going to sweat, and that's not a bad thing. But if you get out there and you begin to feel weak and you're weary, pale in color, in other words, you lose the color to your face, you get clammy skin, so it's damp and clammy, and you're still sweating. Now that's a good thing if you're still sweating, because that means your cooling system is working. And what do we do? What you want to do is stop moving, get into a shaded place if at all possible, shade of a rock, the shade of a tree, whatever you can do. Lay down if it's convenient at all. Loosen the clothing so that you get some air circulation, and apply cool water if you have enough. The main point of the water is for drinking and sipping, but if you have extra water, use that water to relieve the heat, and evaporation will help cool things off. And then electrolyte. If those of you who are regular hikers may carry some electrolyte, or you have a beverage that has electrolytes in it, and that helps restore your body. So that's the way to tackle the heat exhaustion. Now, heat stroke is the real, I hate to use the word killer, but it can be. Heat stroke is the more severe of the symptoms that you can get. And that's where you're going to have a very high temperature. You'll feel very, very warm if you have that. to the point where you're baking. You'll be flushed. That's as opposed to the pale. You'll be flushed. You'll have sort of a reddened face, dry skin, not sweating. And what you want to do is immediately call 911. You really cannot fool around with that. If you or someone you're with gets into that mode, you've got to go for help right away. And let me make a very quick point. Whether you fall and hurt yourself, or whether you have heat distress, or whatever the issue may be, twist your ankle, in the preserve anyway, do not hesitate to call 911. There is no cost to us for a 911 rescue. They will come, they will get you out with the big wheel. If they have to have a helicopter, they'll use that, and they will get you to one of our trailheads. From that point on, it's between you and your family and your insurance company. But don't worry about asking for a rescue. We have so many people that we say, hey, we need to call 911. Let's get you some help. Oh, no, can't afford it, can't afford it. And in a situation like this, you really can't afford to take the chance. So anyway, suffice to say, call 911, lay down in the shade, loosen your clothing. And again, the shade, if you're with someone, take off a shirt and put the shirt to give them some shade, or stand, whatever. We know there's not a abundance of shade out there, but there's a way you can help. Apply the cool water and take small sips until the rescue people get there. Do not try to get them up and walking if they've really gone into a heat stroke mode. So heat and exertion, again, just kind of reiterating the point, this local fire departments make more mountain rescues than anybody. They're not up at 14,000 feet. They're right here at 2,000 to 3,000 feet. And they are very busy in doing that. Let me hang on a minute here. Excuse me, I had it on silent. Were you hearing that too? I apologize if you were. I had it on silent. Anyway, so 3 to 4 deaths every year on Piestewa Peak. Everybody knows where that is in Phoenix. You don't know where that is? Okay. It used to be called Squaw Peak. It's in the Phoenix Mountain Preserve, and it's a very, very popular place. And people go every morning. Some people go every morning for exercise. Another example of that is Camelback, same thing, good trails, but it's very steep. And on the hottest days, it can be very difficult. So we lose people there as well. And then some people fall, and we don't know whether that was heat related or not. So the final point would be that it doesn't just affect you. If you have pets, dogs in particular, everybody likes to have their dog with them. Please make sure that you treat them safely too. I don't take my dog out in the summer after 9 o'clock. I'm back by 9 o'clock, and that can be late. They're low, they're close to the ground, they get the most of the heat, they got their permanent coat on, and it's very difficult. So if you go with them, take water, plenty of water for them, watch the temperatures, and don't expose them to it, because they're as likely as you are to suffer with this. Okay, we're talking about water. This picture here, this is a group of folks, most of them are stewards, and they know very much about this issue, because one of them in the group, I won't point them out, did have heat exhaustion. And that heat exhaustion really knocked them for a loop, and they were quite worried about it. When they came back, they all decided that what they would do is they'd make an agreement as to how to protect themselves in the future. In general, the guideline is that if you're doing exercise outside in warm weather, that you should take about a half a liter of water per hour. Okay, half a liter is about 17 ounces, a couple of cups, say, of water an hour. Now, that is a standard that really varies depending on all kinds of things. It's one thing for you to walk slowly and look at plants and butterflies. It's another to be on a very rigorous hike. So that guideline, you have to adjust that to the conditions that you're in, the temperatures, and individuals. Some people don't seem to need a lot of water. Don't assume that you're one that doesn't, but anyway. So just keep that in mind and use those guidelines. So what they came up with, they're highlighting their water bottles here, is that they like to use 2 containers. They use one container for the way out. So they would plan it accordingly. They would plan the water. So if they're going to be gone X number of hours, and based on the hike, They take half of it in one container and half of it in another. And when they got finished with the first one, whether they were at their turnaround point or not, they'd start the second one. And they found that to be a very interesting and beneficial way to protect themselves. So that's kind of a hack. I know some of you may use backpack reservoirs, and that's fine too. But the bottom line is just simply carry enough water and drink it. It's pretty simple, but as you can see, not everybody does that. Okay, now we're going to go out in the preserve. We've got enough water. We're going to come back healthy and strong. But what can we expect to see out there? Well, it's a big preserve, first of all, and that big is a technical term, but I already did give away to you that we know exactly how big it is. And this just gives you a representation. This is Central Park versus Manhattan Island versus Scottsdale Preserve and the city of Scottsdale. So the preserve is, Scottsdale is a long, thin city, and the preserve runs through half of it, up north and south. So you'll never be very far away from it, which is a good thing. And there's a lot of access points to it. So we've got that 32,000 plus acres. There's plenty for you to do and see, and it's definitely worth the trip. Did I ask you already how many have been in the preserve? Are you all hikers? Okay, a good number of you. Great. I'm glad you've been out there. Hopefully, if you haven't been, this gives you a little bit of incentive to do that. All right. So when you get out there, what are you going to see? Most people come out and they're very interested in seeing wildlife, right? They want to get out of the city. They like to see plants and stuff, but where are the animals? And that's the question. Why don't we see? That is one of our most common questions from visitors. They get out and after a few minutes, they look around. I thought this was a preserve, or is it teeming with animals? And they don't spot them. Well, there's a reason for that, and we're going to talk about it quickly. First of all, you see this guy, and anybody know what this is? Javelina, good, thank you. There's a javelina, and he's not that easy to see, as you can tell, because that nature gave him that protection. So you may not see him because he's standing still, or he's on the other side of a bush or something. So you've got the natural protection that they have blending in. Here's one of our shoulderless friends waiting in the grass there, and he's not very, or she is not very easy to see either. This, don't know whether you could even see it at all, but there is a deer with antlers in there, and if it wasn't for the sun coming over at dawn and making those antlers grow, they felt on the antlers glow, not grow, you'd never know that there was a deer there. And then a lot of stuff happens at night. So this is a picture of a trailside camera near a water hole, and you see that Mr. Mountain Lion was refreshing himself there. And then sometimes you got to know where to look, if you should look up or down. In this case, there's a bobcat. The full disclosure on this is that if there was a rest of the picture, there's somebody's dog is sitting at the bottom of it, and this poor bobcat reached up the cactus to protect himself, and probably not very comfortable. But anyway, that's why we ask you to keep your dogs on a leash in the preserve. Okay, so let's talk about what they do when they're out there. This is their own protection. When are you likely to see them? Well, they are crepuscular. That's a 50-cent word. Is anybody aware of what crepuscular means? Crepuscular means that they're out at dawn and at dusk, 2 different times a day. That's when they travel out. So if you want to see animals, many of them, if not most of them, are out there at either dawn or dusk. Excuse me. And when they're out there, what are they looking for? They're looking for food and water, which makes sense, and also cover and concealment, because they're either predators or prey, and both of them like cover and concealment, because if you're prey, you want to hide yourself, and if you're a predator, you don't want to give away your position before you have a chance to make your pounce or whatever your mechanism is going to be. So the cover and concealment. What's the difference between cover and concealment? Any military people here? Cover is actually protection. So many desert animals will be in a hole in the ground, and that's cover. It's also concealment, which is the second element, and that is just hiding. So I can be behind a bush and be concealed, but it's not much cover if a puma jumps on me. So that's the distinction there. Transition zones are important. We're going to spend a little time on transition zones because that's where you find a lot of the animals. And remember that they see and they hear and they smell much more effectively than you do. They have capabilities far beyond what humans have. So they're going to pick up your presence before you're able to see them in most cases. So what do? If you really want to see them and you got all this going against you in terms of the animal's natural protective, well, again, go out at dawn and dusk because animals are what? Crepuscular, right? And saunter, don't walk. If you want to see animals, don't do your power walk because they'll hear your feet, they'll feel the vibrations, and you'll be very noticeable to them because most animals don't do that kind of sustained walking. You want to, and vary your steps as well. Quiet, sometimes that's hard, particularly if you're a group of people, but if you're talking, the animals are going to hear you. And then you stop and listen for them. You might hear something in a bush. You might hear some birds. You might hear some birds stop their chatter, and that may mean that another animal is around. You want to scan the landscape from the bottom up. Why does that make any sense? Well, because if they're moving and you're going like this, you may miss it. But if you start and look into the distance and you're looking up and down and movement goes across your vision, then you got a good chance of spotting them. And then your fellow hikers may love your aftershave, and they'll appreciate it, that you took a nice flowery bath before it, but the animals do not. Actually, they do appreciate it because they know you're coming, and they're, again, not going to let you see them. And then the final little bit of exciting knowledge here is that if you do, sounds a little bit like a distress call to many animals. So I haven't had that work, but a friend of mine has had it work a couple times. You do that and you be real quiet and you'll see an animal look out, and sometimes you can spot one that way. So, okay, so now you'll be able to spot and see all the animals you need and want. Let's talk a little bit more about transition zones. Transition zones are those areas that move from, in this case, we've got rocks and vegetation, and then we've also got altitude here. This is an arroyo or wash, and you can see there's a difference in altitude. That's transition zone, and that's a good place to spot animals. Another transition zone, of course, the well mowed golf course versus the natural vegetation, and then you go on into the foothills, which is something different again. So you'll see the animals patrolling in these kinds of areas. And then finally, just another example. It was just a nice shot. So, but you can see the transition there between the high ground and the vegetation. Okay, so here we are again. This is a trail in the preserve, and right there, you can't really see it. I'll give you a close up in a minute. There's something in that transition zone between the wide space in the trail and heading back into the bushes, and that's what is in that circle. Whoops, I got ahead of myself. That is the home for, and I've already given it away. I ruined the surprise. That's a tarantula hole. And so if you're looking for a tarantula, that's where you'd find one. Don't stick your finger down in there, but if you wait long enough, you might come out. But he's not alone. He's out there looking for something to eat. So there's an unsuspecting beetle. There's the tarantula. And there is another very interesting critter. Anybody know what that insect is? Tarantula hawk. Tarantula hawk. Yes, very good, very good. That is a tarantula hawk. And a tarantula, both of these insects survive and eat by stinging their prey, okay? So the tarantula will sting the bug that stuns them, and then they're much easier to consume. The tarantula hawk takes that a little bit further, takes that a step further. Now, those of you that are somewhat squeamish, you might want to cover your ears for this one here, because what the tarantula hawk does, and you can see them there engaging with the tarantula, is they drag the victim, in this case the tarantula, to a nest. And then the female lays her eggs in the victim's stomach, in the tarantula's stomach. Yep, I warned you, you don't have your ears covered. And then the eggs hatch, and the larva actually feeds off the poor old tarantula. That is great for the cycle of life for the tarantula hawk, but not too good for the tarantula. So anyway, it's kind of gruesome and slightly gross, but that is life out there, and you'll see those flying around. If you see one of those, yes, you have a question?
Yeah, I saw those. It looked like a flying helicopter, and you don't spot them because they have red wings. And I did a little research because we have them on our bushes. I avoid them. If they sting you, it's either the first or second most painful sting of any insect. And they said, if you get stung, lie on the ground and cry like a baby, and you'll be better in a half hour.
Thank you. That's good. That's good advice. Good information. So in general, they will leave you alone, but clearly they are venomous, and they will be painful. So just stand back and watch them. They're kind of awesome in that sense. It's hard to miss them when you see them. Okay, we're back to the trail again. This is a, yes, sir.
So we're hiking on trails, and very often you see a hole in the trail, and build a trail or even off the side.
Right.
There's got to be more than just tarantula.
Yeah, a tarantula is just one. There are many, many creatures that live in holes in the desert. It includes tarantulas. It includes Palo Verde beetles. Depending on how big the hole is, we have 3 squirrels. They're all ground squirrels. So the smaller ones, some of those could be ground squirrel holes. Some of them, if they're bigger, they could be a ground squirrel. If they're really big, could be a badger or something like that. But at any rate, there's many animals that live in the ground, and there's a lot of good reasons for that. I mentioned both cover and concealment. It allows them to limit an approaching enemy from one direction, and they're able to protect themselves. And the temperatures are much more comfortable underground, both when it's warm and hot outside. So again, another whole subject we could talk to you about, but a lot of holes in the desert, a lot of critters living there, and it's fun to watch them. Again, don't put your finger in. We ran into a lady and a young child, and he was putting his finger down into these holes, and we suggested that was not a great idea. She said, "Oh, his fingers are so short, I don't think there'll be a problem." Okay, you can only say so much. All right, so we're to the whiptail lizard, and they're interesting. We're going to tell you why they're interesting. And this is a Harris squirrel. The whiptail is interesting because of its ability to reproduce, and that ability is the parthenogenetic capability of the female not needing to bother with a man to be able to with a male to be able to have offspring. Okay, that's a rare thing in nature. I know a lot of you women wish it was that way, but you're not a lizard, so you don't have that benefit. What's fun to do is if you do the math here, if 60% are parthenogenetic, which means that they're females and they can reproduce without any assistance, and then you figure that means there's 40% left, and that means 20% are likely to be male and 20% female. Now you're up to 80% are female or have that capability. So when you spot one of these, you can say, there's a female whiptail. And you got an 80% chance of being right, and who's going to prove you wrong? Okay. Anyway, that's getting one of those facts that you can share, and people think you're a little different, but it's okay. It's fun. And then the point of the squirrel is the tail, and it essentially serves as a parasol. That's a permanent carry with you device for shade, as you can see in the sun there. So it's fun to kind of observe what you see and how the animals behave when you're in these transition zones. Here's another common animal. It's a bird called a quail. It's a gamble quail. Those are the ones we see the most of here in the Sonoran Desert. Two different pictures. It's quite a bit different in size. Is one well fed and happy and the other starving? No. What it is they are adjusting to different conditions. And I pressed the right button here. That's called fluffing, and that's called sleeking. So it's essentially the same size bird that you're seeing here, but this one is they fluff and they bring air under their feathers, and it's like insulation. It's kind of like a down vest for that we might use. And then sleeking is when they hold it tight, and it allows them to move quickly, and it's a little easier for them in the heat. Okay, so water, we mentioned water for people. I mentioned it also applies to your dog or your pets, but also it's important for all desert creatures because it's clearly a source of nutrients and hydration, which we all need. And it's also a medium for dilution and removal of body waste, which is a big deal. Those of you, anybody ever seen a desert tortoise? Desert tortoise, real cool creature that we have a monitoring program for them, and everybody loves to spot a desert tortoise. But what we have to remind everybody is if you see a desert tortoise, do not touch it, do not pick it up, not because they'll bite you, but because if you pick it up, it will urinate. And we don't care about your shoes, but if they urinate, they've lost a significant and very important amount of moisture. They keep that in their urine. So if you cause them to do that, and the conditions are very difficult, and they don't have a source of replenishment, it could be the end of them. So again, this is just water and animals and how critical it really is. So desert, they're always balancing between what goes in and what goes out with regard to water. And they have different sources. The income is obviously water itself, either rain, a source of water, a puddle or something. There's food, water in the food. And some animals, for example, the pack rat, get all their water from their food. They seldom, if ever, actually drink water. They don't need to. They get it from the vegetation. They eat a lot of vegetation. So they don't need that. And then finally, there's what's called oxidation, which means it comes out in the process of processing the food, either bringing it and consuming it or through other bodily processes. How do they use it? Evaporative cooling. For us, that's sweating. Most animals don't actually sweat, but they do have evaporative processes. Dilution and excretion of body waste, we've already talked about that. And then egg and milk production for the females. So that all is a use of water. Okay, another interesting animal, the hummingbird. They look really pretty and they look very delicate. They're actually pretty tough little buggers. About 30% of their body is muscle mass because they're always moving. And how fast are they moving? Well, about 80 beats per second. So everybody, who can do this 80 times in a second? Nobody. All right. Heart rate 1260. That's one heck of a heartbeat. And their food consumption is about 70% of their body weight. Their water is 4 to 8 times percent of their body weight. So those of you who are inclined to put out feeders for hummingbirds, very much appreciated. They do need it. They really thrive on that. So if you can maintain that, that's good stuff. It's not just for fun on your patio. It really does serve an important purpose. Okay, back to the preserve. We met the gentleman already. This is a javelina, as you've noted. It is not a pig. The javelina is most closely related to hippopotamus, or more closely related to hippopotamus than it is to a pig. It's called a collared peccary, and it's quite a bit different. It only gives birth to 1 or 2 young at a time. It has 4 mammary glands versus 6 to 20. Again, this is important stuff. And they have a scent gland. As the scent gland in their back is critical, and often, if you do hike frequently, you will smell before and if you ever see a javelina. They have a very unique musky smell, not particularly pleasant, but it's important to them. That's how they identify each other, how they identify their little clans and all the rest of that. So those glands are pretty critical. A pig does not have that. So they're very different, but they do resemble the pig, and they're fun. Like with pretty much every animal out there, you want to stay away from them. You can run into them anywhere. You do see them traveling crepuscularly on this usually a south-facing slope, because that's where the heat is. But they're generally harmless. A lot of people worry about them because they're scary. You'll hear about, quote, javelina attacks. It's usually because somebody was walking with their dog, and the dog reacts and the javelina reacts, and it ends up being not a good situation. So if you see them, just stand still. They don't see very well, and they just go by scent, and it'll be fine. You can watch them. They're fun with, 2, 3, 5 little ones with a group of half a dozen adults. So it's a fun critter in the desert. Okay, we're going to go to the plant world now. And what I'm pointing out there are some saguaros, and what's the significance of it? Well, let me show you some more things here. What do you see? Whoops, okay. If you look at a group of saguaros, like we're looking at here, this picture was taken in the preserve, what you'll start to notice is that there are groups of them that are of a similar height. No two are alike, so they don't actually look alike, but they're of a similar height. And those are called cohorts. The word cohort, that's why we have it down here, comes from the Roman legions, and they called the smallest division of their military a cohort, and it was about 1/10 of a legion. So, again, somebody asked you, quick, how big is a cohort? Well, 1/10 of a legion. So what's the importance of that? What's value? Well, what that telling us is, and it's not a surprise, but as you study the saguaro, they have thousands of seeds every year, but the conditions have to be just right in order for the seeds to actually germinate and then for them to actually survive. So there's only certain years, and they can be 5, 10 years apart, when the actual seeds will propagate and make it because of the rainfall and the other conditions out there. So that's why you'll see a group that's at a cohort that's at a certain height, and then there'll be some that are higher and so on. And it's simply because that was when they were able to start. And there's large gaps in between those starting points, and that difference shows you the cohorts in the saguaro family. Saguaro is a very fun and distinctive plant. Again, we offer hikes and lectures on that, but very quickly you can get a sense here of, before we go to that, the size of it. We do work with young people, I think I mentioned to you, and the fun part about them is, they're somewhere 6 to 8, maybe 10 years old. And we ask them, okay, if this saguaro is that big, how old is that saguaro? About the same age you are. So about as big as their thumb is how far big a saguaro can grow in the first 6 to 10 years. And then you can see the other, we say, I think 45 here, they can, 45, they can actually get to 60 feet, but this is more common. Okay, water, how much water can a saguaro retain? About 80 pounds per linear foot. That, of course, varies, but that's a lot of weight. That it gets into many thousands of pounds because it's in the arms as well as the rest of it. That's 120 kilograms for those of you that like to work in metrics. And as I mentioned, it does include the arms. Here's a little story about somebody or two guys who thought they would have some fun with saguaros. So they grabbed their shotguns and they head out to hunt saguaros. Now, that doesn't sound like much of a challenge, does it? Well, they thought it might be. So this actually happened just west of Lake Pleasant up here. And they went out there, spotted a young saguaro, and thought they'd do some plugging, cactus plugging. And they picked a small one, and sure enough, blew it away. It didn't get away at all. It didn't dodge them, didn't do anything. They just nailed it. So they thought, well, that's fun. Let's get a bigger one. Let's get a bigger one. So they went to a bigger one, And this time he picks a 26-foot saguaro and proceeds to nail it. And of course, nothing small. He went for the base again. Well, what he didn't pay attention to was that while he was blasting the base, one of the arms was shaking and was weighted just in the right way to fall and crush him. So that was the end of Mr. Grundmann. And he was responsible for Mr. Grundmann. So it wasn't all sad, because he was responsible for the song immortalized by everybody's favorite band, the Texas Lounge Lizards, and a song that they wrote called Saguaro. He also received a Darwin Award, so he was highly decorated for his battle with the saguaro. So don't shoot saguaros, just appreciate them. Okay, vistas are pretty, but there's some other interesting stuff to do out there on the ground, and that's tracking. Does anybody do tracking? Any hunters? You've probably done a version of this if you're hunters. And so if you're not, as a hiker, it's equally as enjoyable to spot what it is that you're seeing when you see this track in the ground. Anyone here know the difference? There's two different animals. Can you give me a identification of which is which?
Bobcat, mountain lion, coyote, bobcat.
There you go. It's coyote and bobcat. You know which is which?
Coyote and bobcat. Oh, I didn't see it.
You're absolutely right. Very good. You know why? I mean, you're on a roll. Huh? Okay.
Coyote's probably got some claws. Bobcat does not.
Okay.
Yes?
Yes. It's the retractableness, if that's a word. The dog cannot retract his or her claws, and the cat can. So unless they're, getting ready to use them, they keep them in. So that's perfect. That's a great indicator. And there's another telltale that differentiates it. So candid, that's the dog family, that's the cat family. But the other thing to look for is this lobe right here. That's for a cat. You see the difference? See, that's more like a pyramid. It's not quite a sharp point. But if you see that lobe, the bottom is different, but in a track on the ground, it's really hard to see that. But if you're out there and you see this, it's a feline. So the claws, which this gentleman properly identified, the anterior lobes, which I just showed you. And here again, this is a real track. This is not the drawing. And there you can see it. It's a little off center there, but you see that little dip in the lobe that matches that. So then you've spotted a cat. And that's a pretty big one. So that's probably a mountain lion. Okay, another fascinating thing I'm sure you're all interested in is scat. And scat is also identifiable to the animal, as you might suspect. The dog is, my pictures are a little pixelated, but if they look fuzzy, it's because they are. That means they've consumed something that had fur, which is some of their favorite meals. And so you see that, and that's how you'll know that from a vegetarian animal. And also, the dogs are typically segmented, where a cat is more extruded. So again, when you're out there with your family, you can say, "That's cat poop," and they'll be impressed. Okay, more tracks. We'll keep going here quickly. More tracks. Anybody want to guess on these as to what we're looking at here? Some are tougher than others.
It's that deer on the bottom left. Good. How about let's start up here? The gentleman guessed a deer, and he's correct in the lower left picture. But how about this one? Kind of an X, like a bird. Good. It's a roadrunner. I won't keep you in suspense. It's a roadrunner, the X. And then we have over here
Javelina, right. So let me advance a little bit. That's the Roadrunner. That is the Javelina track. That's a drawing of the Javelina track. Here's the deer. And what's different here between the Javelina and the deer, the deer, it's more elongated and has sharper points on it. Usually a little bit different space too. Whereas the Javelina is thicker and closer together. So that's how you tell the difference. And again, it's hard in the dirt, but after people do this for a while, you get used to it and you can tell what you've got. So there's the deer. Okay, we've seen this fellow before a couple of times already. This is the Gamble quail, and that's their footprint signature. This is tougher, a bit of a trick, but anybody know what the difference here in these two is that this is a much bigger, in reality, not in my picture necessarily, but in reality, that looks very similar, but it's a much bigger track. What is that? It's not a giant quail. That's a hint. Any idea? Okay. It is a wild turkey. And you won't see them in the desert. That's why it was a little bit unfair. This was taken up on the rim. But you notice how similar they are, except for the size. So that's your turkey track. Okay, different subject again as we're moving through a variety of things in our potpourri. Something called sundowning, and this is not worrying about your grandparents. It's trying to figure out when sunset occurs. Now, why is that important? One, because you don't want to spend the night in the desert in general, unless you're planning on doing it. Number two, you can't, you're prohibited in the preserve. You need to get out of there before sunset. And number three, your spouse will probably lock you out of the house if you don't get home on time. So you want to make sure that you know when sunset is. There's a lot of ways to do that. You can check the tables in the paper, you can look it up online, but there is a way, if you forget to do all that, how you can determine, just using what you have with you, which is your hand and a little bit of your head, to determine how far away sunset might be. And using that, you use your hands and your fingers. Now, obviously, you don't want to stare directly into the sun, but late in the day, it's not as bad, and you obscure it with your hand, put your top finger just below the top finger, and each finger is equivalent to about 15 minutes of time. So in our illustration here, you see about two four-fingered hands between the bottom of the sun and the ground and the horizon. And so that is about 2 hours. So you got 2 hours. Now don't forget that the horizon is going to vary, because if you're looking at a mountain, it's going to go behind the mountain before it's going to go. So you got to, check your direction and all that. But anyway, that's a fun way to know if you've got to gauge time and you need to be somewhere. That works, and that's good within about 15 minutes. It's not perfect, but some people's fingers are fatter than others. So, okay, here's another resourceful way. This is about determining which way is south, which way is north. If you need to know what direction to go, and you don't have a GPS or you don't have a compass, because you don't want to fool with that stuff. So what do? Well, I almost didn't use this slide because the answer lies in thinking a little bit, using your watch, but unfortunately only an analog watch. And I realized that not many of you, does anybody have an analog watch in here? Not a soul. Okay, well, this is even more useless than a lot of the stuff I've given you then, but I'll show you really quickly. If you align the hour hand with the sun, as you see it right there, and then you look at find 12 on your watch, pretty much right bisecting those 2 points is true south. And I think that's like within 8 degrees, which again is pretty close. If you're trying to, here we don't have moss on the north side of a tree, because moss doesn't do too well in the Arizona desert, at least on trees. So This is a way to do it. If you want to use a little a pen or a little twig or something, you can see that shading there. So anyway, so if you don't have GPS, you don't have a map, and you don't have an analog watch, you're done for. You don't know. You can look for a compass barrel cactus, because they always point to the southwest anyway. And if you're completely turned around, that'll give you a good way to figure out something of your bearings. Okay, moving right along. We're going to talk about McDowell a little bit, that name. We're living in the McDowell Mountains. We are in the McDowell Mountains, in the McDowell Mountain region. Most of our activity occurs here. Where did the name come from? You're also aware that there is a Fort McDowell. Anybody heard of Fort McDowell? Okay, and Fort McDowell is, well, before it was an Indian casino where you went to donate your money. It was an important and legitimate fort in the U.S. system that was put in place during the settlement and the what was called the Indian problem. They had another name for it, but anyway, the forts were established, and Fort McDowell was the one that was nearest to us. And so we're going to talk about that fort a little bit, its significance, and how it got its name. There is the fort. You can see it right there. There's a representation of a trooper there. Those buildings are all gone, but it's there. Now, some of you, before you asked me the question, they did not have a drone, and they didn't have color film either. So how did they get this picture? Well, it was taken from a water tower. There was a water tower there, and it was later colorized. So that's full disclosure. Okay, this is another. Oh, that's the same picture. That's taken from this direction. So you're looking down the parade field at Fort McDowell, and then those would be. They did not have a compound, a wall around them like you see in the movies a lot. This is very typical of a desert fort complex, as opposed to the Fort Apache look, where you've got log walls and everything. That was very, very rare, and certainly not in our part of the country. Okay, so who named it? Well, the gentleman that named it was General John Mason. What was his job? He was in charge of the Arizona Territory military. And so he was searching for a name when they created the fort. And he was not a dumb guy, because he named it for his boss. He named Fort McDowell after his boss, who was Irvin McDowell. Irvin McDowell was kind of a Renaissance man. He went to West Point. He spoke French. He did gardening and painting and all kinds of cool stuff. And he had a very successful early career, and was very well thought of. So he was put in charge of the first Battle of Bull Run. And we're going to talk in a little bit of detail about that. And that was not a winning cause. The North got beaten badly. Also, he was a commander in the second Battle of Bull Run, and they still lost. So his reputation as a general was not particularly strong. However, there's a reason for that, and that's what we're going to talk about. Going to jump back to McDowell for just a minute, though. I wanted to show you here the reason Fort McDowell is there. I mean, even today, it seems a little remote, right? I mean, we're right here by the Phoenix metropolitan area, and if you go out there, out Beeline Highway, you'll see where the casinos are today, and that's where the Yavapai Indian community is. But it's not really close to anything. So why was it there? Well, there was the Indian routes from the Tonto Basin, which is here, and then on up into Cave Creek, used these trails rather heavily. So McDowell was established right there at that confluence, and then there was a satellite camp called Reno out there, and between those two compounds, they had a great ability to both observe the activities of the Indians and interdict if they needed to do that. So you can see this just illustrates the point here. They were able to go in pretty much any direction, and so it was very strategically beneficial. This road here actually became part of, I mentioned the Stoneman Road. This actually was used as part of the Stoneman Road. This goes up through the preserve and on up to Prescott and Fort Whipple. Okay, now a little bit of explanation regarding the I'm going to try to end an hour. We're getting there, so bear with me. This is our last major subject here. This is the Battle of Bull Run. Anybody, any Civil War aficionados here? No? Okay. Well, very quickly, the reason it's significant to us right now is that Irvin McDowell, the gentleman for whom the mountains and the fort are named after, I said was well thought of. He had the assignment. He had 35,000 troops under his control, and he had the assignment early in the Civil War, 1861, to go down and take Richmond, which in Richmond was the capital of the Confederate country, and so his job was to go down there and take that. And had he done so, it could have been a very short war. It had just begun and essentially was getting going in 61 and went on to 65. If he could have made that, we would have had a different story. But here's what happened. He is located here and has got his assignment. Beauregard, the Confederate general, is here at Manassas. And by the way, the southern, if you're a Southerner, you call it the Battle of Manassas, not the Battle of Bull Run. So there's Manassas. Patterson was another Northern general. He had 18,000 in his command, and his job was to keep an eye on Johnston, the Confederate commander, who had another 12,000 people. So he was supposed to keep an eye on him, and if he started to move to support Beauregard, he was supposed to stop. He was supposed to interdict them. Okay, so McDowell gets the signal to go, and he starts to head down there. Well, what McDowell doesn't know is that the Confederates have received information as to what his plan is, and when and how he's going to do what he's going to do to get by Manassas and on down to Richmond. So Johnston builds a whole bunch of bonfires and has guys run around yelling and talking and everything to fool poor Pat. Whoop. Wait a minute. I'm sorry. I don't know what happened here. Okay, to fool Patterson. So Patterson thinks that they're all there. He's watching these bonfires and the smoke. They're running horses up and down and stuff. Well, in the meantime, Johnson's guys all get on a train, and because Manassas is a rail junction, and are riding down to reinforce Beauregard. Well, so the numbers change. 35,000 against 20 isn't bad odds, but when you add another 10,000, he had 10,000 guys go down there. It becomes a little unbalanced for the attacking force. Suffice to say, it did not go well. The North is in a rousing retreat, heads back up to Washington, and of course is disgraced, and the rest of the war continued, and that significance will come back to us here in just a minute. These are some of the players. There's McDowell on the right, and this is Salmon Chase, the Secretary of the Treasury, and there are just some battlefield scenes. Okay, so what happens to McDowell? Well, McDowell was a capable administrator. As I say, he did have a good reputation until he got crossways in these battles. So he actually came out here to check his namesake fort. He decided that the troops didn't look very well fed, so he ordered them to start building vegetable gardens. And the significant part about that is that the soldiers, in order to do that, went and discovered the Hohokam canal ditches, and that's what they used to irrigate their gardens. So it was one of the early, Phoenix is built on a system, and again, another story for you, but Phoenix is built on the Hohokam irrigation system, and along the Rio Verde, it has similar trenches and canals, and so that's what they used to build his vegetable garden. So he retires in 1882. He's sent to the Presidio, which is what he commanded. Is the commander of the West, and he becomes, after he retires in 82, he becomes the parks administrator for the city of San Francisco, parks commissioner, I guess is the right term. And those of you who have been to San Francisco and have been to Golden Gate Park, then you've been to one of his prime accomplishments. He was the one that established Golden Gate Park for San Francisco when he was in that role. And he was buried at the Presidio and honored there. Okay, so here's the backstory. We're getting down to the exciting conclusion here. The backstory, as it often does, involves a woman, and her name is Rose O'Neal Greenhow. Rose O'Neal was very highly placed in society. This is before the war, born in 1817. She married Dr. Greenhow. Greenhow was a bit of a diplomat. They traveled the world. So she knew a lot of our key people in Washington, and she knew people throughout the world. So she had a good reputation. Dr. Greenhow unfortunately died in 84, and so she moved to Washington, D.C. for her home. And she was a frequent guest at a couple of different presidents in the White House. She was, however, a pro-slavery sympathizer. So she was quickly recruited to be a spy. And she not only just watched over her back gate, but she had a network of 16 operatives that she used to provide her with information. And they were very successful. In fact, they're the ones, if we go back to our Battle of Bull Run, it was her spy network that collected the information on the troop movements at Bull Run and enabled the Confederates to move their troops in a timely way and beat the crap out of McDowell. So that is the tie-in with what we've talked about. So what happens to her? Well, Salmon Chase, who I mentioned to you as the Secretary of the Treasury, has employed the Pinkertons to be spies for the North during the war, and they were on to Rose. And so they found out what she was doing and they caught her. And so she went to prison. And she went to prison at the old Capitol Prison, which was really a former federal building that had been turned into a prison. So it was not exactly bad conditions. In fact, she was able to have her daughter with her. And she also had her maid with her just in case she had any need. So they treated her pretty well. So well that it didn't stop her spying at all. She kept on getting information. She would send her maid out with information. The maid would bring it back. She'd throw things out the window to some of her operatives, and was pretty successful as a prisoner. Well, the South really appreciated her, and so they engineered a prisoner exchange. And so she was freed in 1862, that's less than a year away, and brought to Confederates lines. The president of the Confederacy met her and honored her, and she had a little trouble going home to D.C. She was not the popular socialite that she had been before, so she decided she'd go to England. So she escaped, so to speak, to England, writes a book, earns money. She's kind of the darling of the English, as this quaint colonial lady who's trying to undermine the Union. But she gets homesick. This is after she wrote the book supporting the Confederates. That's where she earned her money over there. She gets homesick, and so in 1864 she wants to come back. She does come back to the United States again, the same way she got away, with a gunboat, and they're bringing her in, and the gunboat is detected, and so rather than her escape with the gunboat, they put her in a rowboat and tell her, and she agrees to make her way to the shore in the surf. But there is a high surf, high wave situation, and the boat capsizes. Unfortunately for her, her fortune is around her neck. It's in gold coins, and the gold coins, if you've ever felt one, are quite heavy. So when she went into the water with her life savings around her neck, it did not go well. So the next day, her body was found, and that's how we confirmed that she actually did expire as a result of all that. She was given a state funeral in Richmond, and at least until recently, I know there's been some shifts in that. They used to honor her down there. The Daughters of the Confederacy used to honor the anniversary of her death every year. So, so this actually does lead to something that we could think about, and that is if Rose O'Neill and her trusty band of spies had not provided the information to the Confederates, would McDowell have been successful? If he had not been undermined, he might in fact have won that. The Civil War would have been over in a year and a half, which would have changed history significantly. And then instead of Grant on the $50 bill, maybe it would have been Irvin. We could have had, instead of calling him Grants, they'd call him Irvins, and he would be the hero, and we might quite possibly be living in the Grant Mountains instead of the McDowell Mountains. So, you know, it's just something to think about when you're pondering all the other important things we talked about today. Okay, so I'm a little longer than I wanted, but we are at the end. I know it's sad, but I want to encourage you to enjoy the desert. I think most of you said you had been out there, but if you haven't, please go in the preserve, wave to the blue shirts, share it with others, invite others to be out there. The philosophy is if you enjoy it, you appreciate it, you'll support it, take care of it, and we'll get it built into society. Be safe, remember the heat, remember the water, remember to be nice to the critters, and then last but not least, support the McDowell Conservancy. And if you want to join us, we'd be happy to have you become a steward, and we have lots of different things to do. History's only one small part of what we do. So I thank you for bearing with me. I thank the folks online. I know we have some online people watching as well. I'm glad we were able to do that. I will take some questions. I think we have another 15, 20 minutes, so we don't have to use that up, but if you have questions, and we may have some online from the online folks as well. Thank you. Thanks. Any questions? Nope, doesn't look like anybody online. Okay. Well, they're running out of time. Anyway, appreciate you bearing with me. Hope you find some of this usable and at least impress your friends with it. Take care. Have a good rest of your summer.
I got a question.
Yes, sir.
You said saguaro.
Yes.
5 years. So every time they flower, are there seeds in that flower every
Yes.
time?
Well, the flower turns into a very attractive red fruit. And that red fruit has about 2,000 seeds in it, little tiny seeds. And that red fruit then either the birds eat it and you know, take it away somewhere. It falls to the ground. The Native Americans treasured the fruit, the saguaro fruit, and they made everything from jelly to wine with it. So an individual plant with 2,000 times a couple of hundred flowers, you know, there's tens of thousands of seeds. But again, the conditions are so rare that it prospers and propagates that creates that cohort band that we talked about.
Have humans been able to take those seeds and plant them and grow them?
Oh, sure. Yeah, you can do that. It just takes, you know, you saw, you got to have a lot of patience and be, you know, on the young side if you want to see anything. Any other questions? Thank you for that. No, that's a good question. Does the saguaro have water in it? No, it does not. It has moisture in it. It does have it's hydrated, and the secret to the saguaro survival is that it's able to pump that water up throughout the plant with the ribs. The ribs make it an upright cactus, but it's not the way you said tap it. And there's the legend or the misperception that you can do that with most cactus, and you really cannot. There is moisture there, but most of it has a lot of acidic fibers and other things in it that make it very unpalatable. So it's not an ideal source of water for humans. Now, animals can eat it; they can get away with it. They love the prickly pear, and they will eat a saguaro occasionally, but in general, it's not. Tall as it is, the radius would go out in that direction all around it. So if you're, in the shadow, if I'm the saguaro and I fall, my roots would go out that far. And they're all very shallow, a few inches, except for the main root, which is not a true taproot. It only goes about a couple of feet at most. But you'll see some of these surface roots get very, very healthy, very big, and that's what anchors them. You've not seen a surface root? Well, in the preserve, you'll see them. They get uncovered generally at an older saguaro. You'll see that. You'll look toward the base, and you'll see them coming out, particularly on a hillside or something where they get uncovered. So, yeah, they do, and that's their anchor. Even with those anchors, because they're so shallow, their biggest natural enemy is a lot of rain followed by a heavy wind, and so they don't have enough anchor, and they'll get blown over. And that's sad when you see that.
And how often do they bloom?
Once a year. Once a year. Yeah, they get their blooms once a year in the late spring. And sometimes they're
Regional Park saw one flowering here a week ago.
Yeah, I have seen some of that. Some of the desert flowers will do that in the fall if the water is sufficient. But, to be honest, now that you mention that, I don't know whether they actually go to fruit or not. I've never seen a fruit in the fall. It doesn't mean they don't exist, but I'm just thinking about that as you mention it, because I have seen the flowers. The flowers turn to the fruit, and some people will say, well, I saw red flowers and white flowers. No, what you saw was the creamy white flower with some fruit, because the creamy white flower lasts for about a day, and then it starts to turn into the fruit. And if it isn't otherwise picked off by a bird or something, it'll turn into the fruit, and so it looks like it. So, and that is the state flower for Arizona, is the saguaro flower. Yes, sir.
Have you seen any studies or anything from the, I think, 2019 monsoon, where we didn't get any moisture that summer, and you can see a lot of them, rotting out the bottoms? Do we know what the health of the saguaro is? I know, especially by Sunrise and Lost Dog, I see we've lost a lot of them.
Yeah. I have not seen any definitive studies. We have seen the loss of more saguaros because of the progress of climate change. It's hotter. They're a subtropical plant that has moved their way up here, and they're very limited in terms of their altitude and the amount of moisture that they need. So you won't see them much below 2,000, certainly not below 1,000 feet, and not above 4,000 feet. And so as the climate changes and as it gets drier and as it gets hotter, it is affecting them, and we are losing them. And I know of some surveys that are happening, but I don't know the results. We are losing more. If you see it rotted, it's usually because it's got this epidural necrosis, which is a bacteria that starts to rot them and kill them. But anyway, it's a great question, and we're going to know more about that, I think, as some of these surveys get completed. So they are suffering. Yes, ma'am.
In 2020, all over town, the saguaros were dropping their arms. I mean, everywhere you looked, and they were just so. That was the survival. I was told survival of the saguaro is drop your arms, and maybe the center will still live. Just arms laying on the ground.
The best explanation for the bent arms is that actually happens in the wintertime. The frost will do that, but they typically survive that. What will happen is the frost will damage the joint, and they'll turn down like this, and that's where you get those different looks. And then if it's still healthy and growing, it'll start back up. It doesn't resurrect, but it starts to grow back up again. And so frost can also cause the arms to misshape. Dropping them, that very well could be this lack of moisture. Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty sad. Any other questions I can answer for you? Nope. No questions on animal scat or anything. Okay. All right. Again, thank you very much. I appreciate your attention. It was good.
On animal skin.
Oh, you do? Okay. Boy, I should have kept my mouth shut.
So in our neighborhood just recently, we saw it looked like a big old cow. And then there's a big one and a smaller one. I don't know what kind of animal that might be.
You don't have a stockyard nearby,
No?
But but it was that size. It was the size of a cow pie.
Quite a big pile.
Aren't we a free range state? Could it possibly been a cow that passed by?
It could have been.
I know there's
It-
wild cows out, we're in Fountain Hills, so. if that
Yeah.
was-
It's possible, or if there's horses, wild horses, with a bowel problem, it could have been a horse.
That's what she said.
Yeah.
The horse pile doesn't look like